podcasts are about power. The power to define and the power to decide. From protests to power gain, we welcome you to our fight for political and economic freedoms here in America. We're almost there. Welcome to this week's episode.
Okay, hello everybody. It's a special pleasure to be here this afternoon or this evening, whatever time your time is. I have two, certainly to me, young people whom I've known now for years. Oma Moses, whom I've literally known since childhood, uh, even when he was born in Tanzania, and Java Jackson, whom I guess I met you. You were a high school student in
14, so
Jackson.
it's been years.
Yeah, in Jackson, Mississippi, as a part of the Algebra Project when I was doing research into the Algebra Project for for a book. So it's a special pleasure to have these two, doubled by the fact that Omo has done a book on his father, Bob Moses, a legendary figure in Mississippi's civil rights movement and founder of the Algebra Project, where I met Java. Uh, as I said, this could very much be. We could forget the book and just reminisce and have a
Family
reunion
reunion.
and leave it at that. And I certainly would be satisfied. But as a writer, I know the importance of getting information out about a book one has written. So I want to get started with that right away. And I really want to begin this conversation, and it should be a conversation. It's not as much a question and answer as it will be a conversation from my vantage point. And I want to begin this with Omo with a couple of questions. First, since you were born in Tanzania and came to the United States from Tanzania, I'm very curious as to and let me read something from your book. In fact, I'm very curious about what it was like uh, getting to the United States that first time from Africa. And what you wrote, well, you wrote a lot about it, but one of the things you wrote was, and you're describing your apartment building, your apartment, and you said, we pressed our faces against the window in an attempt to see where the alley began and ended. We searched for remains of remnants of Tanzania in the bank of infertile dirt that rose from the asphalt below. Nothing grew except shadows, stubborn blades of grass, a black coiled fence where the dirt plateaued, gripped a sign delineating Harvard University property. We were here because Baba was returning to Harvard after almost 20 years to finish his PhD. How difficult was it making that move from Africa to to Boston, to Cambridge, and how did you navigate that path at every level, from friendship to school to just play?
Yeah, well, thanks, Charlie. It was really a traumatic experience. I mean, when I look back at it, and in many ways, we were uprooted. And so I was four, Maisha, my older sister was six, Taba was two, and Malika was about to be born. And, part of what happened when we came here is, you're moving from a place where the landscape is dominated by, the mountains. It's dominated by, a savanna, and you're coming from kind of a natural world into this country which is dominated by concrete. And just one of the things I was trying to capture was just this shift as we move from a place where we ran around with no shoes on. Kind of the earth was our backyard, and now all of a sudden we were trying to make sense of the buildings and the concrete, and just this new environment. And so one of the things that my sister and I regret, I mean, it's really amazing how quickly you begin trying to adapt and assimilate. And so, my mom and dad would try to speak to us in Kiswahili, which was our first language, and we would refuse. And I don't know, within months, lost the language and lost our ability to speak Swahili. And also, there were other things that we lost as we became American. I feel like, it was really a blessing, and it continues to be a blessing to have that reference point. And I didn't realize it was a reference point until later in my life when I began writing, actually. And I was in a creative writing class, and we were just doing kind of stream of consciousness. And every time I would begin writing, it was like, the writing just kind of took me back to Africa. And I wasn't sure if I was remembering these things or imagining kind of these things, but it gave me a sense of myself outside of America. And I think that's always been powerful, is that, my personhood, my humanity, who I am, begins in Africa, and it doesn't begin kind of in this country within the context of, how we became defined in America.
And you're meeting Americans, Black Americans, essentially, I think. I mean, how are they taking you? Are you strange to them? Or, I mean, that's a part of navigating this new life you've entered as a child.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my parents did a great job. I mean, we're talking about the 70s, and you're still riding the wave of kind of this black power, kind of black pride kind of in the country. And so there was a community of folks that we could connect to. We participated in African drumming and African dance. We began doing Kwanzaa, and so there was a community of folks that we were able to connect to that were trying to maintain or create roots to Africa. But you also deal with folks who are I don't know how to describe it, but folks who don't want to be considered African. And so I felt we juggled with both of those things. And for me, it was like, I became ashamed of my name. Every time
Omawale, you became ashamed of?
Omawala, yeah, every time,
Yeah.
you get, what does that mean? Who is that? But yeah, every time someone takes attendance, or you're in a line and the teacher's going down the line, and by the time they get to your name, and there's a pause and they're trying to figure out how to say it, and it's just it's just kind of a cringe. Right, right.
Yeah.
you know. Yeah, and the other thing that I remember of that time is just all the images in the media, or just everywhere about Africa, and the majority of them would be negative. And so, you'd read books, you'd look at the cartoons, and the portrayal of folks from Africa was extremely negative, and it was a caricature. And so, I was trying to wrestle with just my deep kind of longing to reconnect and my kind of rich memories of that place with the images and the ideas and some of the shame associated with that in America.
Hmm. Yeah, let me, and the other question I want to ask you, and we can come back to both of these really, because your book really goes in some ways uh, into the evolution of your various relations with classmates, with kids in the neighborhood, the Algebra Project. But the other question I want to ask right away is how much of your father, and particularly, Lara Lee, your father's legendary history as a civil rights leader in Mississippi in particular, did you carry with you in your youth and in and this is a separate question from the Algebra Project, but your father's legendary status, how much of that was a part of your early life?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, I think I remember distinctively um, when I realized
And I
my
should
dad.
interrupt you and say, and I
Yeah,
should say, I really should have framed that. And how much of your mother
right.
too, who was very active in the
No,
movement.
they were both, um, freedom fighters. Yeah, so one of the chapters, American Heroes, just talks about, um, being in the auditorium during the Martin Luther King celebration, and my dad, the vice principal saying, we're gonna have this person come up and he's gonna address you, and it's my dad, and I'm just like, what the who is he? Why is he, walking up and, taking the stage? And what did he do to kind of earn the right to address us? And so I say all that to say, I think both of my our parents, really tried to live a normal life and tried to get us to see themselves as just parents and see us as part of a community of people that did some things to try to change the way America was for families and communities during the 60s and beyond that. And so my sense of him as this kind of legendary person really was more a question, and I think it was a question that drove the book, and part of it was like, where did my dad come from? And so, unlike my mom, um, whose parents I knew, I knew my mother's mother and her father. I never met my dad's parents; they had passed away. And so, on a personal level, I didn't have a sense of who he was, within his kind of extended family, but I did have that sense with my mom. And so there was that. But then also trying to understand like what led him to Mississippi and what led him to make the choices that he made. And so, when we were young, we'd get different history books, and I try to look in the back of the book and try to get a sense of, who my dad was and what contributions he made to the movement. And it was always just like a little snapshot, and most of the stuff really felt the same, and I could never really get a sense of like what led him there, and kind of what did he do when he was there that so many people kind of elevated him as someone that was significant. And so I think the book makes an attempt to go back and try and figure out like where did my dad come from. And so in thinking about like where he came from, I think that is part of my own journey and legacy, is like where did I come from and how do I continue in those footsteps. And so the book begins with my great grandfather's obituary, and I discovered that in Mississippi as I began following my dad and beginning to do his work. And that was really illuminating, just from the sense of, as a dad, he really he had a legacy that I wasn't aware of,
Mm.
and he had a legacy of activism and folks that were speaking about and trying to do something about what life was like for Black people in America. And so it felt like that was part of who he was that we just never had access to. And so I think the book tries to bring that forward in a way that contextualizes, every generation has to kind of find and face the challenges of their generation. And so, my great grandfather did that. The folks, Amzie Moore, Ella Baker, and the folks my dad met, and many others in Mississippi were doing that. Uncle Charlie, Cortland, my dad, and so many others were doing that in the 60s. And so it provided inspiration as well as a foundation for, me thinking about what I could do as a young person growing up in the 80s and 90s, and what I could challenge folks like Java and Sammy and April and Albert and others to do, who are, that next generation coming under us. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers your
Yeah,
question.
yeah. Well, we'll come back to it too, but I wanna bring Java into this conversation. Start Java. It's good to see you after all these years. You were high school students when I first uh, encountered you. Deeply involved with the Algebra Project, and a native of Jackson, Mississippi. Uh, I need you to clear up first of all whether, and thinking back to when I met you, were you a student at Jim Hill or Lanier? Because both of those sites rattle around in my head when I think about you.
Right. And that's a really good question, Charlie, because actually Omo and I were just discussing something similar to that. I was a student at Jim Hill High School instead of Lanier, and it was because although I was in the Algebra Project and most of my peers from the Algebra Project, they were zoned for Lanier High School. But I applied to be in a program called the International Baccalaureate Program, and that program was only offered at Jim Hill High School. So April
What was
Davis,
that? Say the
which
name of that program
another
again.
Algebra Project student, and YPP co-founder, we both decided that we would pursue that program at Jim Hill High School. So we were able to still stay connected to the Young People's Project and the Algebra Project, but we did go into a different high school.
Jim Hill being the different high school.
Yes. And Omo and I were just talking about Jim Hill and the IB program, because one thing in the South, or school districts in the South, they like to separate students out based upon their abilities. Um, they want to steer students or encourage students to go into programs that are considered advanced. Meanwhile, you have majority of the other students not being exposed to those types of opportunities and
Mm.
resources and curriculums. Um, so it creates, this distance in how one group is learning as opposed to how another group is learning. In that program that April and I chose, there were only 30 students accepted into that program. And this is a school next to a graveyard in the middle of the hood. So majority of these other students are not being exposed to this curriculum that's based out of Switzerland. So I think that just kind of touches on how education is kind of administered in the South. You know,
Would you
focus.
state what that curriculum was again, so we can be clear about it?
It's called the International Baccalaureate Program, and so the curriculum is based out of Switzerland. So certain schools around the country apply to be in the program, and those teachers travel and train based upon that program's curriculum, and they only accept your top performing students.
Hmm. Yeah, we're also
Okay.
just talking about how, it's similar to what I experienced in Cambridge. And,
Yep,
I just have that memory and I write about it in the book going to high school, my freshman year in high school. And essentially, we all were on a separate track and we were
hmm
all, going into different programs. And, I was being prepared because I was on an honors or AP track
right,
to go to college. Other kids were being prepared to do, occupational education. And as my dad would describe it, other kids were being prepared to go to prison.
exactly. And your mom described it as a caste system in the classroom.
Cast in the classroom.
Cast
She
in the
made a video
classroom.
about that. Yeah.
And that's exactly what it is, because the focus is on your so-called high achieving students, and everybody else just got to get it how they get it,
Hmm.
because these students make the school look good. So this is who we're going to focus on.
Yeah.
See. Well, how did you make your way to the Algebra Project,
hmm
Java? Uh,
Well, I actually was in a situation where I was able to choose to be in the Algebra Project because just a glitch in the system. I was in the system for 3 different schools at the time, because as an elementary student, I was encouraged to attend a APAC school, which is a honors school. And so I applied to be in the program. They actually put me at 2 different schools. But where I was living, I was zoned for Brinkley Middle School. So I basically had the choice of which which school out of the 3 of these schools that I want to go to. My mom dropped me off at Brinkley first, and I got a chance to experience Bob and what he was doing, because that particular sixth grade class is where he was launching that algebra project in the school. So at me, and they told me, okay, you can give it a couple of weeks. If you like that, then and you want to stay, you can. Or you can choose to transfer out to one of the APEX schools. Well, I decided that I wanted to stay at Brinkley, and it was mostly because of Bob and what I saw. And I know the first time that you talked with me about that, I may not have had the language or able to articulate why I was wanting to stay at Brinkley, wanting to be with Bob. But I know that it was his approach. I didn't know at the time that that's called a radical approach to teaching, but I knew that this is something different. If I go to these other schools, yes, I'm going to be with my peers who are all on my level. We're these honor students, the geeks, the nerds, going through this separate program. Or I can stay over here with the kids that are in my neighborhood, stay in this class with this man who he's not acting like a teacher. He's acting like a facilitator. He's coming in here with games and a flagway game, a map on the floor. There are no books. I'm like, something this is very interesting. There's something very different about this. I'm not at a individual desk, which is what I would have been at in one of these APAC classes, because those type of programs in schools, they set you up to compete with your peers. Whereas in Bob's class, I'm not competing with my peers. I'm being encouraged by him to work with my peers despite their abilities. He's sitting us at a round table together. Not we're not an individual desk. He's actually getting down on the floor, sitting on a map. He's bringing us to a level where he's not over us, he's with us. And so I was picking up on that. And I just thought that that was the most important factor in my decision on why I decided to stay at Brinkley and go through the Algebra Project.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I mean, I feel like the work of the Algebra Project and the Algebra Project classrooms were really trying to create a space where everyone can learn, everyone can contribute to the learning process, and we can all kind of come up together
Come up together. That's
and,
right.
you know, shifting away from this idea that, I need to escape, I need to figure a way out for myself, but, everyone can make a contribution and there's a way for all of us to kind of make it out. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a challenge, but the way the classroom had to be structured, the way, like you said, he had to facilitate, and the way everyone's voices
Heard
got heard and were part of the
everybody.
conversation, um, enables it's an opportunity for that to happen. And I think you find, I imagine like, well, what would it have been like if when I went to high school, that I actually was in a class with some of my friends,
Right.
the kids that I hung out with after school. What would it have been like if we had to study together, if we had to figure out how to work through some of this stuff?
Figure out life together.
Absolutely.
One thing you talked about in the book was your meeting when you and Bob, your almost dad, met with the principal of Brinkley Middle School. They met with him and they talked to him about, and I love this part that you included. Bob told this principal that we needed to raise the floor.
hmm
And it just completely went over this principal's head. It's kind of like, well, what do you mean raise the floor? Like for all the kids?
Right.
You mean this even the kids in special education? And and Bob's like, yes, everybody.
Yeah.
And I love that because that spoke to how his method of teaching kids was so radically different than what the school districts were having teachers do. He wasn't interested in just separating out the kids who could do. He wanted the everybody to be lifted up, everybody to be given the opportunity to excel. Because that's the thing, you remove the barriers, you give them the resources, and guess what? You never know what these kids can do.
Right. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Uncle
What?
Charlie, how much of that do you think comes from the experience in the 60s organizing? Like, how do you make that connection to what you all did in Mississippi in the 60s?
It was the same. It was, you know, it was almost exactly the same. I mean, really, what Bob was doing, one with the Algebra Project, was a continuation of the work that evolved in the 1960s, the organizing work that evolved in the 1960s. One in the using Java's analogy, raising the floor. In our case, we were raising the floor for the benefit of gaining the right to vote. And that was one of the big arguments we faced from opponents of, say, of voting rights. You want everybody to have the right to vote, even people who are not educated.
Hmm.
Uh, it's the same
Right. The
uh,
farmers
idea
deserve to vote.
of, yeah, of gaining the right to vote. And when we said gaining the right to vote, We were talking about gaining the right to vote for everybody, not the
Everybody.
people with college degrees, just the people with college degrees, or not just the people with high school education, but everybody, the
Yeah.
sharecroppers, the
Mhm.
maids, the cooks,
And that's what I love about
everybody.
Omo's book, Charlie. I mean, he's connecting those dots for us. The work that Bob did, how he did it, how he approached it. He went into the community. He was in these people's houses, in their neighborhoods. And he was using the same exact approach that he used with us when he came to our classrooms. Like Omo included how when he wanted to work with the sharecroppers or the farmers or the people that he was trying to get them to go register to vote, he felt like there was a method to it. He would present them with the I don't know if it was a paper or the test or whatever, and ask them, have you seen this before? Would you like to um, fill this out? Would you like for me to work with you and show you how to fill this out? So in Omo including that, it made me think about this is exactly what Bob did in our classroom. He would present something in the same way. And even Omo picked up on the same type of method. He would teach us, if we're going to do this workshop, this is how we present what the skill is that we're going to be working on that day. And I'm just going to give just a brief example, like with the graphing calculator workshops. You could get a sixth grader to learn linear regression just by how you approach them, and Omo his method was put them in a group, give them a game. They're racing to stack these Unifix cubes. They don't know that they're about to learn linear regression, you know. And then he asked them the question of, well, how many cubes do you think you can stack in 5 seconds? Well, how many do you think you can stack in 10 seconds? Well, guess what? I have this graphing calculator that can actually predict how many you stack. Well, he's already built this enthusiasm. He's already making these kids feel that they have the ability to do this. Can they beat this calculator? So I guess all that I'm saying is there was a method to what Omo did, and it was the same type of method that Bob was using with the sharecroppers.
Yeah, I would just add to that, just this idea, because I remember that part of the book, and he talked about getting folks to be able to imagine themselves at the registrar's office. And once they can imagine themselves there, then it made it more likely that they could go and take that actual step. And
Right.
I think, with the technology, it was like imagining, getting the young people to imagine themselves being able to utilize the technology, but also understanding how they could um, program the calculators, how they could be kind of producers and creators, not just consumers of the technology. And so, a lot of what the Algebra Project was trying to do, and what we were trying to do, is like try and create an opportunity for folks to think that they could have a different relationship, with the calculator, with learning, with
Mhm.
math, and understand like how those things connected to their community. But one thing I was going to ask you, I know Uncle Charlie, you're supposed to be interviewing us, but
No,
I,
we're just
I
having
had
a
another
conversation.
question.
I haven't
I
seen you in a
was,
long time.
as Java was talking, I was just thinking about how it was amazing to read about how you guys were doing that work with the young people, in Macomb and in other places. You were creating schools, you were creating classrooms, you were creating an alternative type of educational experience for them. And I don't think that part of the history really comes across. Folks don't really know about that. I don't know if that you want to share more about that.
Yeah, I didn't know that, Charlie, that you were behind the classrooms, and I didn't know that until Almost book.
Well, yes. I mean, this is a problem with just the history. I mean, it's narrow. The what gets in what academics call the canon is very, very limited. And if you really want to have the people, the ordinary, regular people who actually the ones who power change in the history. It's very. I'll tell you a story, very short version of a story. When the Algebra Project book came out, Radical Equations, and I was bringing some copies of the book back to the principal of Lanier High School, and I was sitting on the steps with some kids from Lanier. This is long after you all have graduated. Um, and as it happens, as you know, the Brinkley is across the street from what, at least when I last visited it, was the Fannie Lou Hamer Library, public library. And I decided to engage these students, half a dozen of them, uh, in a discussion about Mrs. Hamer. Within the context of asking them about Mrs. Hamer, I said, I knew her and she was really important to Mississippi. And one of these kids, when I said I knew her, jumped to his feet, stared at me in total amazement, and said, "You was alive then, Mr. Cobb?" Because the way the history, but for me to be saying I knew somebody whose name was on the library and being alive, that was difficult for this kid to imagine. I mean, people whose names are on libraries are uh, people who are dead and buried. They're not people sitting on the steps of my school talking to us. And that's a problem with history.
Mhm.
And it's a consistent problem with history and, in a broader sense, with learning. Learning gets pushed into really narrow confines. You know, one of the problems that, as I remember from the Algebra Project in Mississippi, just trying to get it going, was that a lot of educators didn't believe that black students were capable of learning
Right.
algebra in the eighth grade. Just that belief. The- what do you mean you want to teach algebra to eighth grade students? And the way the system worked was that if you tried to teach algebra and failed, which is what the belief was, then the school itself gets penalized.
Mhm.
They lose money. And so that works against trying to teach algebra. I mean, these were things I learned just doing the research around the algebra project. And I could go on and on and on about this, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation. Instead, I want to ask you, Java, uh, oh, when did you first meet Omo, and what was your impression of Omo when you first met him?
So I first met Omo as a seventh grader. So I had already been in the Algebra Project working with Bob and Omo's brother Taba. I met them as a sixth grader. So Omo came that next year. And when he came into the class, I felt like he was a lot like Bob. He was totally different from Taba. Taba was more of the flamboyant, I mean, rah rah. He's just high energy, um, support for Bob. But when Omo came in, He's very quiet, very reserved. Same way Bob came in, in the sixth grade, almost seemed to be there observing a lot. I felt like he was, um, although he was there to support Bob and the lessons that he was giving, he was also sitting at the table with us and observing us, like getting to know us, learning what our strengths are. He was studying us, I feel, because he knew how to pair us up. And, you asking me that reminds me of a memory that I have of Omo that sticks out for me is because he knew what each student's strength was and where they were struggling. And so he at one point he wanted me to work with Sammy, one of my classmates,
Yeah.
Sammy. And I had an issue with that because I felt like I don't have time for Sammy Omo. Sammy is not taking things serious, and we got to get this work done. I think we were working on putting together a module,
Hmm.
and I felt Sammy was slowing me down. I'm all about teamwork, but right now I need you to step in and handle Sammy. And Omo looked at me and he said, "You know what, Java? That's selfish. That's very selfish of you." And I mean, the look on my face, because nobody had ever called me selfish. I'm like, he just called me selfish because I don't want to take time to babysit Sammy. And it was one of those things that stuck with me. Like I grew up and it stuck in my mind because I had so much respect for Omo. And he was such a huge influence on me. The fact that he told me that I was selfish because like I said, he learns our strengths, he learns our struggles. And that stuck with me throughout my life. I went on through high school and college, and my approach to other people and other students and even working on jobs was to stop and think, am I being selfish? Am I thinking of myself and what I need to get done and what I need to accomplish? Or am I taking the time to see that other person who may not have or be where I am? You know, am I treating them like Sammy?
Yeah.
And here's Omo, sitting on my shoulder. Look at you being selfish. But I mean, I know I'm going all over the place, but that was my impression of Omo. Like I said, very reserved, very observant, very intuitive. He's there to support Bob in the lessons, but he's learning us, and that made a really big difference. And I think that's how he was able to grow the Young People's Project. Because just speaking upon myself, there was one evening where I stayed after school because I wanted to rewrite my groups. We're always in groups, we're always in teams. I wanted to rewrite our equations because we always had to present our work and present our equations the next day. And Omo had been working with us, but I didn't like the way it was written out on the chart paper. I wanted it to be color coded. I wanted it to look good when it goes up on the walls. So I stayed after school and sat there and rewrote all of these equations over again. And Omo, in Omo fashion, he's observing. And he comes over and he's like, "What you doing?" I said, "Well, we're presenting tomorrow and I want these equations to look good." And he said, "Would you be interested in coming to Tougaloo with me tonight and presenting this work?" And I was like, "Sure, okay." And he took me to Tougaloo with him. And in the book, I think he mentioned how his mom says, "You never know what that spark may be," you know. And I think that in itself was just one example of how he was able to grow YPP, because he took me to Tougaloo that night to present for professors and
Hmm.
college students, because he was trying to recruit college students from Tougaloo College, a school that his parents had history with, but he wanted to bring in more college students to do the same exact thing that he was doing in our classrooms. And so when he took me over there, he was using my strength that, hey, she takes presenting very serious. Well, let her present in front of these people
Right,
then.
right.
But the thing is, when I came back, my buddy, you know, my friends are like, "Oh, so you were presenting over there at Tougaloo?" Yep, I went over there with Omo. That's like a spark, because now you got students they want to do what Java did. Well, I want to present too. Well, I want to go with Omo when he goes somewhere, and so it's like you're growing this interest because he's taken one student who has the ability to influence other students and get them involved. And so now we got a group of kids, because he's got relationships going with Sammy and Dusty after school with basketball. But when it came to students like me, and I'm a girl, I'm not hanging out with him playing basketball. So we are connecting and building a bond in a different way. I don't know if that answered your question, Charlie.
Yeah, 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 it does. Let
Right.
me
I
ask
got a lot of good
you.
memories of Omo.
And I wanted to add to that because I remember meeting Java, and she reminded me a lot of myself in terms of just being just determined, had a sense of what she wanted to do, where she wanted to go, and was just willing to do whatever it takes to get there. And so it's funny you mentioned the selfish comment. So I can I can remember the first time someone called me selfish,
Oh,
and this had
really?
to do with basketball. I think it was, I was at GW playing basketball. Basketball is a team sport, but it's all about, in some ways, that balance between the individual, and you
Yep.
want to be on the court and you want to
Do
score the
your
buckets
thing.
and do your thing, and the team winning. And I would always, work hard. I was, the hardest work. I was always in the gym. And I remember the coach's wife, Miss Jarvis. I don't know what it was, but she called me selfish.
Oh, the irony.
you know, and I never forgot that. I was like, "What?
Yeah.
I'm selfish." So I was like, "All right, Jarvis being selfish. She's not being a
So
team
he's
player."
passing on the
Right.
lesson. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But it's I mean, I think there's a tension between like individual accomplishment
Hmm.
and the group's progress,
Right.
And I think students like Java get pushed on a track where it's
Hmm.
about, your individual accomplishment and what you can do on your own, because for whatever reason you've been able to work through the cracks in the
Right.
system. um, but for us to be successful, it has to be
A
about what we
group
can do
effort,
together.
a
Yeah.
collective. And
um,
that's why Omo was so important to the class. Like he's supporting Bob's whole idea of raising the floor. So here he is as a younger person, closer to me in age, letting me know that, hey, this is a group thing. Don't leave Sammy behind. Bring Sammy with
Mhm.
you.
mhm.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Sammy, we were able to work it out. We got it done. And I love him to death.
Yeah.
So, but Omo influenced not just, my math skills. He was growing me personally. Like I was learning life skills, learning about myself, skills that I was going to be able to take on to the next level. You know, Even in the workplace, workplaces want people who are willing to work well with others and be on teams. So here it is. He's teaching me as a seventh grader the idea of teamwork, the importance of teamwork, the importance of knowing the weaknesses of someone on your team and how you can help them address it, not just you pushing yourself forth.
Mhm.
Mm. Let me ask you: is there something in common that all of the young people attracted to the Algebra Project have? I mean, is there some common denominator that can be used to describe people like you, Java, and Sammy, and
Mhm.
others? Uh,
Um,
Cookie.
mhm. Well, it's probably a lot of things, but I guess the first thing that comes to mind is barriers, poverty, um, the need to push yourself because you don't want to be in the situation that you're in. One thing that attracted a lot of students or kept students so enthusiastic about the Algebra Project was Bob and Omo and Taba was making our world bigger. Not, they were taking us to spaces and places that we wouldn't have seen if we were just in a regular classroom. So that it was almost an escapism, to be honest with you. And they were feeding us. I mean, they were, you got kids, we're living in the projects, Some of us may not go home. I mean, and eat a meal that night. But you know what? If you stick with Omo and you come do this math, Bob's gonna order that pizza, you know. And I'm not just saying that's the only thing that all the Algebra Project kids have in common, but that's just one thing. You have kids who are coming from similar backgrounds, some coming from similar backgrounds, and so we're finding different things about the Algebra Project and the Young People's Project that is addressing certain parts of our life that maybe we're not maybe we're not proud of, or maybe we know that when we pay attention in class, or work with Omo or work with Bob, they're going to introduce us to something new that we've never seen before. And so kids in the Algebra Project, they know when they come into that classroom, it's going to be something exciting, whether it's some toothpicks and gumdrops. I mean, I got sick eating the gumdrops that Bob would bring. He's trying to teach me polynomials and binomials and all of this, but he's bringing in gumdrops, and I'm eating as many as I'm stacking. I'm eating. So and that's exciting, 'cause it's like you're not sitting in a desk memorizing and, multiplication and blah, blah, blah. You're in here trying to build structures. And
Mhm.
kids, I guess, from our background, that just gave us something to look forward to. You're excited to come to class. Omo, maybe you have some other aspect that describes Algebra Project students.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of like just me personally. When I came to Mississippi, I was leaving college, and my aspirations around playing basketball, were ending. It was like a never-ending dream. But it was interesting to be able to begin working with students, working with you all, and build relationships, and to feel just the love and the energy, and for me to feel like I had a sense of purpose that was made me feel even better than anything I had accomplished, like on a basketball court. And so I think when I think a lot of the young people, when you're teaching with someone, you're teaching someone, you're also learning, but you're bonding, you're building a relationship.
Mhm.
And I think there's just something intrinsic in that, and like giving young people opportunities, to be learners and teachers, and to have some agency both around learning and teaching. um, and not all kids, I think, are excited by that, but I think there's a lot of value, and it opens people up in terms of just the relationship that can be formed with your peers and with younger
Mm-hmm.
folks and with other folks. And so I feel like that's been a through line for all of the young people, is kind of having that experience and wanting to do it again. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is it
Who
Charlie
were
in your
involved.
book?
Huh?
I said in your book, Radical Equations, you talk about how Bob and Omo brought that delegation from Mali. And Omo also mentions it in, the White Pearl. You've got these inner city kids and you're introducing us to a delegation from Mali, Africa. We wouldn't have met a delegation from Mali, Africa. And that's just another example of them broadening or widening our world, expanding what we could be, what we could experience. Um, just he brought Africa to us. And
Hmm.
I know when we first started this discussion, and you were asking Omo, about his experiences in Africa and how it felt to come to America. Um, and Omo talks in such depth about his experiences in Africa, and it makes me think about James Baldwin. He James Baldwin had this saying where he said, to be African American is to be African without the memories, and to be American without the privilege. And Omo is able to take us to Africa in this book. He has the memories, he has the experience. So, and that's something that a lot of us don't have, won't have, or may not, ever get to experience. And yet you're reading through his experiences. And I told him, when I first read, I was like, I feel the pride that I felt when I was first watching, a Alex Haley movie, Roots and Queen, because here it is, this guy has memories. He can trace back his ancestors and his people, and it's like when we watch that or reread that, we felt pride because that's not something that we can do, but it felt like a collective, like it was collective for the culture. And so reading Omo's experiences, I'm like, this feels, even though they're his personal experiences in Africa, being able to read that feels like he is sharing Africa with us. And that's pretty powerful. He has the memories and he's sharing it with us. And we can all feel, you know, that we have Africa in us just through his words, through his mom's words, his stories about Bob and Janet's experiences in Africa, you know.
With each other, those of you who were in that cohort of students involved in the Algebra Project all those years back, are you still in touch with each other?
Say that for me again. I can't hear you.
Are, do you all stay in touch with each other who were, at Brinkley and in that early, maybe first cohort of students in the Algebra Project? Do you talk to each other now that you're what grown up?
Oh, we
Uh,
do.
and 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 I guess part of that question that I didn't ask, I'll ask now is, and what have you, as adults, what do you bring from that experience today?
As an adult, I think that my experiences with the Algebra Project basically set me up for success. It opened doors of opportunities because it gave me the skills that I needed, the math skills that I needed to move to the next level, go to college on a full scholarship. Um, I was given different opportunities to go to different schools. Different schools offered me scholarships, and it wasn't necessarily because of my grades. You have a lot of kids with great grades. I felt like a lot of the opportunities that were being thrown my way was because of my experience with the Algebra Project. Because a lot of times with college admission applications, they want you to talk about something other than the academics. Tell us about yourself. Tell us what you've done in your community. And so that was always easy for me to do because I'm like, okay, I'll talk about the Algebra Project. I can talk about the Young People's Project. And it was those parts that they wanted to hear more about. And so the money just started to come in, and the doors would just open. My experience with working with OMO with the Young People's Project landed me in Veracruz, Mexico, teaching kids in the mountains. And I didn't pay to go down there. I didn't even have to bring spending money because I was able to go in front of a panel and convince them that, hey, I have the experience, I can go down there and be an ambassador and teach kids. And this is why I've done this in my community. And so and I talk about the Young People's Project and they want to know more. And then I get a chance to talk about the Algebra Project. So I guess I say all that to say being in the Algebra Project and the Young People's Project was the key that opened so many doors. Um, at one point, I spoke to Bob over a video, and I was just telling him how some young people, they come from backgrounds where they have parents who have influences and networks, and they can just pick up the phone and get their kids into certain schools and get their kids onto certain jobs. But the students that came through the Algebra Project and the Young People's Project, we were able to get in these doors because of the work, because of the skills, because of what we learned working with OMO. That opened doors for us. And so I had so many opportunities throughout college. Once I went into the workforce, I had a job already waiting for me because of my work with the Young People's Project. Because again, um, everybody wants to know more about that part of me. They don't care about the grades, because they see plenty of kids that have all A's. What makes you different? And that's what Omo and Bob gave me. They gave us that edge because they gave us that experience. They gave us that space to thrive. They gave us the confidence because yes, I was a student that was going to make good grades just because I was determined, but that doesn't mean that I was that student who was going to be confident enough to go in front of a panel of people and convince them. Anybody can make good grades, but can you stand up and present yourself to other people? And that's like one of the fundamental things that Bob pushed in his Algebra Project classes. And Omo talks about that in the White Pearl. When he first came to our classroom, that seventh grade class, Bob was so adamant about each student getting up and introducing themselves and speaking the math language, how it should be spoken.
Hmm.
And Omo, and if you didn't, if it didn't come across how it needed to come, you needed to start over. And I think that got on Omo's nerves. But that was such a good lesson because I mean it sharpened us. Um and it gave us that edge that we needed throughout our life and in so many different situations. And now I have children. I have two girls and I think that makes me so proud that I'm still using the same exact skills that Bob and Omo taught me. I'm now using them with my kids because I started out homeschooling them. And one of the first things I would teach them is, all right, you're going to get up and you're going to tell me who you are. I call it the Gallipo Academy. And they're like, oh my God, Gallipo Academy. Yes, stand up, tell me who you are, tell me some things about yourself. I mean, my baby, she's 4, but I'm making them speak up. I can't hear you, so it's the same concepts. Present yourself to me. Tell me what you know, how, what makes you you. What are some things you want me to know about you? Um, I spent a lot of time with Omo's mom, Janet, and she always, Omo talks about it in the book, she always wanted her kids to be conscious about where they came from, Africa, make Africa the center. And it's funny because I had the opportunity to spend time with her, and that influenced me. And then, so now with my kids, my little ones, I'm doing the same thing. I'm telling them, look, everybody comes from Africa. I know you're about to go to school. You're going to kindergarten. I understand this school is all white. You know, you're going to be the only black kid in that class, but they came from Africa. You know, and it made me so proud because I show up to the school and they had to do pictures of themselves. And Elle's biracial. She's her dad is white, so, and this is a white school. But I show up to that classroom and my baby has painted herself brown. You could have bought me for a wooden nickel because I'm like, she is conscious that she is different. She's showing that she's proud to be black because I'm raising her as black. And she painted herself browner than what she is.
Right.
And so I say all that to say it's just like everything is so connected. And that's what I love about Omo's book is because he connects all these dots from things that Bob and Janet did in the 60s and the lessons that they learned and the lessons they taught. And now Omo's teaching me and my peers those lessons. And now we can go out and teach our peers. And now as we're older, we're teaching our kids the same type lessons.
Yeah, I mean, as John was talking, I'm thinking like back to like what we were thinking we could try to accomplish, by going to Mississippi and working with the students. And in many ways it was like, we want to do what Uncle Charlie and Snick did, and we want to be able to like change America and and stuff to be different.
Just taking a
And
big
yeah,
chunk,
yeah.
big goals.
So y'all set us up. We were like, all right, we're gonna come down here and we're gonna do what
The
they
new
did. Yeah,
freedom
yeah.
riders.
But it was, it's a different time, different place. The work's the same, but the context different. It's like, you're working in the classroom. It's about, you know, building awareness, getting agency, getting kids' attention, and planting seeds of consciousness. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I think about, well, what did we do? All that time spent down there and building those relationships, I see it in Java. So the majority of the kids, it felt like they weren't growing up with their parents, or they were being raised by their grandparents, or maybe there was one parent in the home. And I've just seen across the board, like all the young people we work with, I mean, they're stepping up and they're just
Mm-hmm.
parenting their kids in ways that, they weren't necessarily parented, and
Right.
there's just so many ways in which, just listening to Java talk. I mean, it's been so many years, and how she's internalized, or how you've internalized kind of your experiences. Um, and, there might not, this is an outlet for that, to be able to talk about that. But, people don't think of this as part of the movement, you know what I mean? As part of like the wave that leads to change. And I think it is. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
Uncle Charlie, when y'all went to Mississippi, you were kind of inheriting Amzie Moore's work and other people's
Mm-hmm.
work, and kind of there was a moment that you all were part of that enabled that to be to challenge democracy in America and challenge kind of the conditions in a way that created a new landscape that we inherited. Um, and so I think, that's just part of it. When I think about my dad, I'm like, he was just planting seeds.
Mm-hmm.
He was planting seeds, and all of the folks that I've been able to have access to from the movement, it felt like, they were planting seeds and giving me a piece of themselves in a way with the hope that I might take that and cultivate it and do something with it. And so, I say all that, as we think about kind of the time that we're in, and it still feels like, we're just in the backlash to the movement, and we
Right.
just see and feel that. And in some ways, it feels like it's worse
Mm-hmm.
than what it was, 10 years ago, 20
Mm-hmm.
years ago.
But we can have hope.
But we
This
got
new
hope.
this new generation,
Yeah.
Gen Z, is not playing. They are not playing. I mean, they're calling people out.
Yeah.
Jasmine Crockett, she's ready.
Hmm.
Young people are organizing. Gen Z, they're like, okay, you snatching DEI, you calling equity the bad word.
Yeah.
They're coming up with plans for that. You know, you want to snatch affirmative action. All of the white lash that is happening, um, just because we had a black president, and we're probably finna get another black president. So it's a cycle. We've seen it before throughout history.
Hmm.
Every time we make progress, the machine comes to kick us down, try to kick us down, put their feet on
Yeah.
our necks. But I think that the new generation, they're ready. I mean, that the group that came after me, they're more fierce than my group.
Yeah.
Mhm. Well, I think on that note, that's a good note to end on. We're out of time. So, but I do thank you for this time that you've given to us. You know, uh, I mean, this after all is a SNCC Legacy Project podcast. So, in a way, it connects your past and our past to the future.
That's
And,
right.
and for that, I'm deeply appreciative.
For full biographies, additional resources, and B-roll clips, visit our website at www.snclegacyproject.org.